Relax with stories that help you sleep, work, and calm your mind. Today's story is called Age Gap Romance. We invite you to listen and support our channel by clicking subscribe and receiving channel notifications to conveniently follow the next videos. Sincerely thank you. Seattle's autumn rain fell in a relentless, silvery curtain, each droplet a whisper of the city's restless soul. The streets of Capitol Hill shimmered under the weight of it, neon signs bleeding their colors into puddles that reflected the moody sky. Arya Tran, 22, and teetering on the edge of her final year at the University of Washington, darted through the downpour, her canvas sneakers soaked through, her dark hair clinging to her face in damp tendrils. Her psychology textbooks weighed heavy in her backpack, but heavier still was the ache in her chest, a fresh wound from a breakup with her first love, a boy who'd promised forever but left her with nothing but questions. She was a storm of contradictions, bold in her dreams, fragile in her heart, a young woman caught between who she was and who she wanted to be. She pushed through the crowd, her breath misting in the chilly air, until a quaint storefront caught her eye. Its weathered sign read Callahan's Books, the letters curling like an invitation. The windows glowed with a warm, amber light, a beacon against the gray. Arya didn't think twice. She slipped inside, the bell above the door chiming softly, and was instantly enveloped by the scent of old paper, leather, and something faintly spiced, cinnamon perhaps, or cloves. The world outside fell away, muffled by the rain and the quiet hum of jazz drifting from a vintage record player in the corner. Billie Holiday's voice curled through the air, slow and sultry, like a lover's sigh. The shop was a labyrinth of shelves, each one sagging under the weight of stories. Arya stood there, dripping onto the hardwood floor, her eyes scanning the space. That's when she saw him, Ethan Callahan, 38, the man who owned this haven of words. He was behind the counter, his tall frame slightly slouched as he turned the pages of a worn novel. His presence was magnetic, not in a loud way, but in the quiet confidence of someone who'd lived enough to know what mattered. His hair was dark, streaked with the faintest threads of silver at the temples, falling in soft waves that brushed the collar of his navy sweater. The sleeves were pushed up, revealing forearms corded with lean muscle, veins tracing paths beneath skin that looked warm, lived in. His hands, strong yet careful, handled the book as if it were a relic, his long fingers tracing the spine with a reverence that made Arya's breath catch. Ethan looked up, and their eyes met. His were a deep hazel, flecked with gold, framed by lashes that were unfairly long for a man. There was a weight to his gaze, a story untold, but also a softness that felt like a promise. Arya felt her cheeks warm, suddenly aware of her drenched appearance, thin white blouse clinging to her skin, outlining the curve of her waist, the gentle swell of her breasts. She crossed her arms, but not before his eyes flickered, just for a moment, taking her in. It wasn't leering, it was curiosity, appreciation, like he was seeing more than just her rain-soaked form. "You look like you could use some shelter," he said, his voice low and smooth, with a faint gravel that made her stomach flutter. He set the book down and stepped around the counter, moving with an easy grace. Up close, she noticed the faint stubble along his jaw, the way his broad shoulders filled out the sweater, the subtle scent of cedar and old books that clung to him. He was older, yes, but his body carried a vitality that belied his years, lean, strong, the kind of man who could hold you steady in a storm. Arya managed a small laugh, brushing a wet strand of hair from her face. Is it that obvious? He smiled, a slow, lopsided thing that crinkled the corners of his eyes. Only a little. He gestured toward a small table near the back, where a kettle sat steaming. Tea? It's on the house for storm refugees. She nodded, grateful, and followed him, her eyes lingering on the way his jeans hugged his hips, the subtle flex of his back as he reached for a mug. The table was tucked between towering shelves, a cozy nook lit by a single lamp that cast golden shadows across his face. He poured her a cup of chamomile, the steam rising in delicate curls, and slid it toward her. Their fingers brushed as she took it, his skin warm against her cold fingertips. The contact was brief but electric, sending a shiver through her that had nothing to do with the rain. "Rough day?" he asked, leaning back in his chair, one leg crossed over the other. His posture was relaxed, but his eyes were intent, like he was really seeing her know, just the soaked college girl, but the layers beneath. She sipped the tea, letting its warmth seep into her. "Rough month," she admitted, her voice soft. "You ever feel like you're running in place, but you're still falling behind?" Ethan's gaze held hers, steady and knowing. "More than you'd think." He didn't elaborate, but there was a depth to his words, a hint of scars she couldn't yet see. He leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table, and she noticed the way his shoulders stretched the fabric of his sweater, the faint outline of muscle beneath. Her mind wandered, unbidden, to what it might feel like to trace those lines, to feel the warmth of his skin under her fingertips. They talked, at first, about nothing books, jazz, the way Seattle's rain made everything feel like a secret. But the conversation shifted, grew heavier, as if the rain had washed away pretense. Arya found herself telling him things she hadn't told Enianino about the breakup, but about the ache of not knowing who she was supposed to be. Ethan listened, really listened, his eyes never leaving hers. When he spoke, his words were measured, thoughtful, each one landing like a stone in still water. "You're young," he said, not patronizing, but gentle. "The world's going to try to rush you into answers. Don't let it. You've got time to figure out who Arya is." She smiled, her heart doing a strange, unfamiliar dance. "You sound like you've been through it." His laugh was soft, a little self-deprecating. "Let's just say I've had my share of storms." The rain hadn't stopped, but the shop felt like its own universe, a place where time didn't exist. Arya glanced at the clock. Nearly 2 hours had passed, though it felt like minutes. She stood, reluctant, her body still tingling from the warmth of his presence. "I should go. Thanks for this." She gestured vaguely, meaning the tea, the shelter, the way he'd made her feel seen. Ethan rose too, towering over her but not intimidating, his height a quiet strength. "Anytime you need a dry spot, you know where to find me." He handed her a small card with the shop's name and hours, his fingers lingering against hers for a heartbeat longer than necessary. His touch was a spark, and she felt it linger as she stepped back into the rain. Outside, the cold bit at her skin, but she barely noticed. Her mind was on Ethan, his voice, his hands, the way his eyes had held hers, like she was the only thing in the world. She tucked the card into her pocket, her fingers brushing against it like a talisman. Something had shifted inside her, small but undeniable. It wasn't just attraction, though God, she felt that tooth pull of his body, the heat of imagining his hands on her. It was more It was the feeling of standing on the edge of something vast, something that could change her. As she walked away, the rain washing over her, Arya knew one thing: she'd be back. Not for the books, but for him. For the man who'd looked at her like she was a story he wanted to read, page by page, and who, in a single afternoon, had made her feel more alive than she had in months. The rain had become a constant in Seattle, a soft percussion that scored Arya Tran's days. It was a week after her first visit to Callahan's books, and she found herself drawn back to the shop like a moth to a flame. The bell above the door chimed as she stepped inside, shaking droplets from her umbrella. The familiar scent of old books and cedar wrapped around her, and Billie Holiday's voice was there again, weaving through the air like a velvet ribbon. Arya's heart quickened, not just from the shelter of the shop, but from the anticipation of seeing him, Ethan Callahan, the man whose presence had lingered in her thoughts, his hazel eyes and quiet strength haunting her dreams. The shop was quiet, save for the soft crackle of the record player and the occasional rustle of pages. Arya's eyes scanned the shelves, her fingers trailing over worn spines. But she wasn't here for books. She was here for the way Ethan made her feel seen, heard, like she was more than the sum of her doubts. She wore a fitted sweater today, deep emerald, hugging the curve of her waist and the gentle swell of her hips. Her dark hair was loose, cascading over her shoulders in waves that caught the lamplight. She'd chosen her outfit with care, though she'd never admit it, wanting to feel his gaze on her again, to see that flicker of appreciation in his eyes. Ethan emerged from the back, a stack of books in his arms. He wore a charcoal button-down, sleeves rolled to his elbows, revealing forearms that were all lean muscle and faint veins, a testament to a life of quiet strength. His dark hair was slightly tousled, as if he'd run his fingers through it, and a shadow of stubble dusted his jaw, accentuating the sharp line of his cheekbones. He was beautiful in a way that wasn't flashy, but devastating, the kind of man who could make your breath catch with a single glance. When he saw her, his lips curved into that slow, lopsided smile that made her stomach flutter. "Back so soon?" he teased, setting the books on the counter. His voice was warm, gravelly, like a fire crackling on a cold night. He leaned against the counter, his broad shoulders relaxed, but his eyes sharp, taking her in. She felt the weight of his gaze, not predatory but curious, appreciative, lingering on the way her sweater clung to her curves, the way her jeans hugged her thighs. Arya shrugged, a playful glint in her eyes. Couldn't resist the tea, or maybe it's the company. She surprised herself with the boldness, but there was something about Ethan that made her want to shed her usual caution, to step into the version of herself she was only beginning to discover. He chuckled, low and rich, and gestured toward the familiar table in the nook. Tea it is then. Chamomile again? Or something bolder? His words carried a double meaning, and she felt a spark of heat in her chest, a thrill at the game they were starting to play. "Surprise me," she said, her voice softer now, almost a challenge. She settled into the chair, crossing her legs, the denim stretching taut over her thighs. She knew he noticed his eyes flicked down for a fraction of a second before meeting hers again, a faint flush creeping up his neck. It was intoxicating, this dance of glances and unspoken words, each moment charged with possibility. Ethan busied himself with the kettle, his movements deliberate, graceful. She watched the flex of his shoulders as he reached for a tin of loose-leaf tea, the way his long fingers handled the delicate strainer with care. His body was a study in contrast, strong yet gentle, weathered yet vibrant. She imagined those hands on her, the warmth of his palms against her skin, the way they might trace the curve of her spine. The thought sent a shiver through her, and she bit her lip, forcing herself to focus. He brought over 2 steaming mugs Earl Grey with a hint of lavender, the scent floral and grounding. "Thought you might like something new," he said, sliding into the chair across from her. His knee brushed hers under the table, accidental but electric, and neither of them moved away. The contact was a quiet fire, spreading warmth through her body. They talked, at first, about small things, the jazz playing softly, the way Seattle's fog made the city feel like a dream. But the conversation deepened, as it had before, peeling back layers. Arya found herself opening up about her studies, her fascination with the human mind, the way she wanted to help people but sometimes felt lost herself. Ethan listened, his eyes never wavering, his presence a steady anchor. When he spoke, his words were like brushstrokes, painting ideas that made her see the world and herself differently. "You're searching for meaning," he said, his voice low, thoughtful. "That's not a flaw, Arya. It's a gift. Most people don't even ask the questions you're asking." She felt a flush of warmth at his words, at the way he said her name, like it was something precious. "And you?" she asked, leaning forward, her elbows on the table, her body angled toward him. "What are you searching for?" Ethan's smile faltered, just for a moment, and she saw a flicker of something raw in his eyes. Regret, maybe, or longing. "I stopped searching a long time ago," he said, his voice quieter now. "Or I thought I did. These days, I just try to live with what I've got." He paused, then added, almost to himself, "Though sometimes, life surprises you." The words hung between them, heavy with meaning. Arya's pulse quickened, her body alive with the awareness of him, the way his lips curved around his words, the faint scar above his eyebrow, the warmth radiating from his frame. She wanted to reach across the table, to touch the stubble on his jaw, to feel the pulse at his throat. The desire was new, raw, a little frightening in its intensity. She'd had crushes before, fleeting and shallow, but this was different. This was a pull, deep and visceral, like her body and soul were conspiring to draw her closer to him. Days turned into weeks, and Arya's visits became a ritual. She'd linger in the shop after classes, her backpack slung over one shoulder, her laughter mingling with the jazz. Ethan would tease her about her taste in poetry too modern. He'd say, handing her a dog-eared copy of Rilke or Neruda. She'd roll her eyes but take the book, their fingers brushing, each touch a spark that lingered long after she left. The shop became her sanctuary, and Ethan its heart, his presence a quiet fire that warmed her from the inside out. One evening, as the sky darkened and the shop glowed with lamplight, Ethan handed her a book-worn copy of The Lover by Marguerite Duras, its pages yellowed, its spine creased from years of reading. "This one's special," he said, his voice low, almost intimate. "Read it slowly, let it sink in." Arya took it, her fingers grazing his, and noticed a slip of paper tucked between the pages. She didn't open it until she was back in her dorm, the book resting on her lap. The note was in his handwriting, elegant and deliberate. "Don't rush to grow up, but don't be afraid of adult emotions." Her breath caught, her heart pounding. The words were simple, but they felt like a key, unlocking something inside her. She thought of Ethan, his eyes, his hands, the way he moved through the world with a quiet intensity. She thought of the heat in her body when he looked at her, the way her skin tingled at the thought of his touch. This wasn't a childish crush, all giggles and butterflies. This was something deeper, something that stirred her in ways she hadn't known were possible. It was desire, yes, but also a longing to know him, to be known by him, to unravel the mystery of the man who'd slipped into her life like a melody. Arya lay back on her bed, the book pressed to her chest, her mind racing. She pictured Ethan's face, the way his lips might feel against hers, soft but firm, the way his body might press against her own, all strength and warmth. The thought was intoxicating, dangerous, a flame she couldn't resist touching. She didn't know where this was leading, but she knew one thing: she was falling, not just for Ethan, but for the version of herself she was becoming in his presence, bolder, braver, alive with a hunger she was only beginning to understand. The next time she went to the shop, she wore a dress simple, black, clinging to her curves, the neckline low enough to hint at the smooth skin beneath. She wanted him to see her, really see her, not as the college girl seeking shelter, but as a woman who felt the weight of his gaze and wanted more. When Ethan looked up from the counter, his eyes darkened, a flicker of something raw passing through them. He didn't say anything, but the air between them shifted, charged with a new intensity. "Arya," he said, her name a low rumble in his throat, and she felt it in her bones. "Your trouble, you know that?" She smiled, stepping closer, her hips swaying just enough to draw his eye. "Maybe," she said, her voice a soft challenge, "but I think you like trouble." His laugh was quiet, almost a growl, and for the first time, she saw a crack in his calm exterior, a hunger that matched her own. The shop was empty, the jazz slow and sensual, and in that moment, they were the only two people in the world. Arya didn't know what would happen next, but she wanted it, whatever it was, whatever he was. And as she stood there, her body alive with possibility, she felt the truth settle into her. This wasn't just a spark, it was a fire, and she was ready to burn. Seattle's autumn had deepened, the air thick with the scent of fallen leaves and the ever-present rain that painted the city in shades of silver and gray. Arya Tran's world had shifted in the weeks since she first stepped into Callahan's books. The quaint bookstore, with its creaking floors and jazz-filled silences, had become more than a refuge. It was a crucible, forging something new within her. At 22, she was no stranger to desire, but what she felt for Ethan Callahan was a revelation, a hunger that was equal parts tender and feral, a longing that made her skin hum and her heart race. Each visit to the shop had drawn them closer, their conversations a delicate dance of words and glances, each touch, however, fleeting a spark that threatened to ignite. Tonight, though, was different. Arya's day had been a storm of its own, a collision of pressures that left her raw and unsteady. Her parents, ever demanding, had called with their usual litany of expectations: graduate with honors, secure a prestigious internship, uphold the family name. Their voices, sharp and unrelenting, had clawed at her, reopening wounds of self-doubt. She'd hung up the phone, her chest tight, her breath shallow, and known instinctively where she needed to be. Not her dorm, not a friend's apartment, but the one place where she could breathe, Ethan's shop. The bell above the door chimed as she entered, her footsteps heavy, her dark hair damp from the drizzle. The shop was nearly empty, the hour late, the only sound Ella Fitzgerald's voice crooning softly from the record player, each note a caress against the quiet. Arya wore a simple outfit, black leggings that clung to her long, toned legs, a loose sweater that slipped off one shoulder, revealing the smooth curve of her collarbone and the delicate line of her neck. Her skin glowed under the lamplight, a warm ivory kissed by the faintest flush of emotion. She was beautiful, not in a polished way, but in the raw, unguarded way of someone who felt everything deeply. Ethan was behind the counter, his tall frame bent over a ledger, his dark hair falling into his eyes. At 38, he carried an air of quiet strength, his body lean but powerful, the kind of man who could hold the world at bay with a single look. He wore a fitted Henley, the fabric stretching across his broad chest, the sleeves pushed up to reveal forearms corded with muscle, veins tracing paths beneath skin that looked warm, inviting. His hazel eyes, flecked with gold, lifted as she entered, and the moment they met hers, his expression softened, then sharpened with concern. He saw it immediately, the storm in her eyes, the way her shoulders hunched, as if carrying an invisible weight. "Arya," he said, her name a low rumble in his throat, both a question and a comfort. He set the ledger aside, his movements fluid, and stepped around the counter. Up close, she could see the faint stubble along his jaw, the way his lips curved slightly, not quite a smile, but something warmer, more intimate. His scent cedar, old books, a hint of something spiced wrapped around her, grounding her even as her heart raced. She tried to speak, to explain, but the words caught in her throat, tangled in the chaos of her emotions. Her eyes stung, and she looked away, embarrassed by the tears threatening to spill. "I'm sorry," she managed, her voice barely above a whisper. I didn't know where else to go." Ethan didn't hesitate. He closed the distance between them, his presence a quiet force, and before she could protest, he pulled her into his arms. The embrace was gentle but firm, his body a solid anchor against her trembling frame. His chest was warm against her cheek, the steady rhythm of his heartbeat a counterpoint to her own erratic pulse. One hand rested at the small of her back, his fingers splayed wide, the heat of his touch seeping through her sweater. The other hand cradled the back of her head, his fingers threading through her damp hair, stroking softly, soothingly. It was a gesture so tender, it nearly undid her, and she let out a shaky breath, her body melting into his. He didn't ask questions, didn't demand explanations. He simply held her, his silence a language of its own, speaking of safety, of understanding. Arya's hands curled against his chest, her fingers brushing the taut muscle beneath his shirt, and she felt the strength there, the quiet power that made her feel both protected and alive. His body was a landscape she wanted to explore, the broad planes of his shoulders, the lean taper of his waist, the way his thighs pressed subtly against hers through his jeans. She was acutely aware of every point of contact, each one a spark that fed the fire growing inside her. They stood like that, for what felt like an eternity, the world outside fading until it was just them, just this moment. Arya's breathing steadied, the panic receding, replaced by a different kind of hate, a slow, smoldering awareness of the man holding her. She tilted her head back, her face inches from his, and their eyes locked. Ethan's gaze was intense, searching, his pupils dilated in the dim light. His lips parted slightly, and she noticed their fullness, the faint curve that promised both gentleness and hunger. Her own lips tingled, her body alive with the need to close the distance. "Arya," he murmured, his voice rougher now, laced with something raw. His hand slid from her hair to her cheek, his thumb brushing the curve of her jaw, tracing the soft skin there. The touch was electric, sending a shiver down her spine, and she leaned into it, her body acting on instinct. Her hands moved, one sliding up his chest to rest over his heart, the other gripping his arm, her fingers digging into the hard muscle of his bicep. She felt the tension in him, the restraint, but also the heat, the desire that mirrored her own. She didn't know who moved first. Maybe it was her, maybe it was him, but suddenly her lips were on his. A soft, tentative brush that ignited something fierce. The kiss was gentle, at first, exploratory, his lips warm and firm against hers, tasting faintly of coffee and something uniquely him. But the gentleness didn't last. The fire that had been building between them for weeks flared, and the kiss deepened, grew urgent. His mouth moved against hers with a hunger that matched her own, his tongue tracing the seam of her lips, coaxing them apart. She opened to him, a soft moan escaping her as their tongues met, a slow, sensual dance that made her knees weak. Ethan's hands tightened, one sliding to her waist, pulling her closer until their bodies were flush, the heat of him searing through her clothes. She felt the hard planes of his chest, the taut muscle of his abdomen, the subtle press of his hips against hers. Her own body responded, her breasts pressed against him, the friction sending sparks through her. Her hands roamed, one tangling in his hair, the dark strands soft and thick between her fingers, the other slipping beneath the hem of his shirt, brushing the warm skin of his lower back. His skin was smooth, taut over muscle, and she felt him shudder under her touch, a low growl vibrating in his throat. The kiss broke, both of them breathless, their foreheads resting together. Ethan's eyes were dark, almost black, his breath ragged. "Arya," he said, his voice a gravelly whisper. This isn't simple. You know that, don't you?" She nodded, her lips still tingling, her body alive with the taste of him. "I know," she whispered, her voice steady despite the storm inside her. "But I've never been more sure of anything." He steadied her, his thumb brushing her lower lip, the gesture so intimate it made her heart ache. "You're young," he said, not condescending but cautious, as if testing her resolve. "You have a whole life ahead of you. I'm not that life." Arya's hand tightened on his arm, her nails grazing his skin. "Don't tell me what I want," she said, her voice fierce, her eyes blazing. "You make me feel real. Like I'm not just drifting, not just someone's daughter or student. Like I'm me." Ethan's expression softened, a mix of awe and conflict. He leaned in, kissing her again, slower this time, savoring her. This kiss was differentless, frantic, more deliberate, a promise of something deeper. His hands framed her face, his fingers tracing the curve of her cheekbones, the delicate shell of her ear. She felt cherished, desired, and the sensation was intoxicating, a heady mix of power and vulnerability. They pulled apart, the air between them charged, heavy with unspoken questions. The shop was still, the jazz a soft undercurrent, the lamplight casting golden shadows across Ethan's face. He stepped back, just enough to give them both space to breathe, but his hand lingered on her arm, his touch a tether. "We need to be careful," he said, his voice low, serious. "Not because I don't want this god, I don't, but because it's not just about us. There's a world out there, and it won't understand. Arya nodded, her heart pounding, but she felt no fear, only certainty. I don't care about the world, she said, her voice soft but resolute. I care about this, about you. He smiled, a small, bittersweet thing, and pulled her into another embrace, this one chaste but no less powerful. She rested her head against his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart, and knew that whatever came next, she was ready. The fire between them wasn't just a momentee, was a beginning, a flame that would burn through doubts and fears, illuminating parts of herself she was only beginning to discover. As she left the shop that night, the rain cool against her flushed skin, Arya felt alive in a way she never had before. Ethan's kiss lingered on her lips, his touch a ghost on her skin, and she knew she was stepping into something vast, something that could change her forever. And she wanted it, all of it, every risk, every spark, every moment of him. The Seattle rain had softened to a mist, cloaking the city in a dreamlike haze that mirrored the surreal turn Arya Tran's life had taken. At 22, she was no longer the uncertain college girl who'd stumbled into Callahan's books seeking shelter. She was a woman ablaze, her heart and body awakened by Ethan Callahan, the 38-year-old bookstore owner whose quiet strength and tender gaze had become her North Star. Their first kiss, a collision of need and surrender, had shattered the boundaries between them, and in its wake, they'd stepped into a secret world of their own, a relationship that was as intoxicating as it was forbidden. They moved carefully, their connection hidden from prying eyes. Arya would slip into the shop after hours, when the neon glow of Capitol Hill faded and the streets grew quiet. The bell above the door would chime, a soft herald of her arrival, and Ethan would look up from his work, his hazel eyes darkening with a hunger that made her pulse race. He was a vision in those moments, tall and lean, his dark hair slightly tousled, his fitted shirts clinging to the broad planes of his chest and the taut muscles of his arms. The faint stubble along his jaw caught the lamplight, accentuating the sharp angles of his face, and his lips, full and inviting, curved into a smile that was both tender and wicked. His body was a promise of strength and warmth, from the corded forearms, revealed by rolled-up sleeves, to the subtle flex of his thighs in worn jeans. Arya wanted to memorize every inch of him, to trace the veins that snaked beneath his skin, to feel the heat of his hands on her. Tonight, the shop was a cocoon of warmth, the air heavy with the scent of old books and the soft strains of Miles Davis drifting from the record player. Arya wore a deep burgundy dress, the fabric clinging to her curves, the neckline low enough to reveal the smooth swell of her breasts, the hem short enough to show the long, toned lines of her legs. Her dark hair fell in loose waves, framing her face, her skin glowing with a flush that was equal parts anticipation and desire. She knew the effect she had on Ethan, the way his gaze lingered on the curve of her hips, the way his breath hitched when she moved closer. It was a power she reveled in, a newfound confidence that made her feel like the woman she was becoming. Ethan locked the door behind her, the click echoing in the quiet. He turned, his eyes sweeping over her, and for a moment, he just stood there, drinking her in. "You're going to be the death of me," he said, his voice a low growl, laced with amusement and something deeper, hungrier. He crossed the room in 2 strides, his hands finding her waist, pulling her close until their bodies were flush. She felt the heat of him, the hard planes of his chest against her softness, the subtle press of his hips that sent a spark through her core. His scent cedar, spice, and something uniquely enveloped her, and she tilted her head back, her lips parting in invitation. He kissed her, slow and deliberate, his mouth claiming hers with a tenderness that belied the fire beneath. His lips were warm, firm, tasting of whiskey and want, and she melted into him, her hands sliding up his chest to tangle in his hair. The kiss deepened, grew urgent, his tongue teasing hers in a dance that made her knees weak. His hands roamed, one splaying across her lower back, pressing her closer, the other tracing the curve of her neck, his thumb brushing the pulse point at her throat. Her skin tingled under his touch, every nerve alive, and she arched into him, a soft moan escaping her lips. They moved to the back of the shop, to the small office where Ethan kept his records, a space lit only by a single lamp that cast golden shadows across his face. He lifted her onto the desk, her dress riding up to reveal the smooth expanse of her thighs, and he stepped between her legs, his hands resting on her hips. The contact was electric, a current that ran through her body, and she wrapped her legs around him, pulling him closer. His eyes were dark, almost black, his breath ragged as he leaned in, kissing the sensitive skin below her ear, his lips trailing down her neck to the hollow of her collarbone. Each kiss was a spark, igniting her, and she tilted her head back, giving him access, her fingers digging into his shoulders. "Arya," he murmured against her skin, his voice rough with desire. "You have no idea what you do to me." His hands slid up her thighs, slow and deliberate, his fingers tracing the edge of her dress, teasing the soft skin beneath. She shivered, her body responding with a heat that pooled low in her belly, a need that was both thrilling and overwhelming. She wanted him, wanted his hands, his mouth, his everything, and the intensity of that want was a revelation, a discovery of a part of herself she'd never known. But it wasn't just physical. In Ethan's arms, Arya felt understood, cherished in a way she'd never experienced. His gaze, when it met hers, was a mirror, reflecting not just her desire but her strength, her courage, her heart. He saw her real her, not the daughter or the student, but the woman who was learning to love fiercely, unapologetically. And in her, Ethan found something he'd thought lost, a spark of youth, a reason to feel again. Her laughter, bright and unguarded, was a melody that softened the edges of his guarded heart. Her touch, bold and curious, rekindled a fire he'd buried years ago. They spent stolen hours like this, in the quiet of the shop, or in Ethan's small apartment above it, a space as warm and eclectic as the man himself. There, among shelves of books and records, they explored each other, not just bodies, but souls. Arya learned the stories behind Ethan's scars, the physical ones, like the faint line above his eyebrow from a youthful misadventure, and the deeper ones, the losses and regrets that had shaped him. He spoke of a life lived fully, but not always wisely, of love that had burned bright and then faded, leaving him wary of opening his heart again. Yet with Arya, he couldn't help it. She was a force, a light that pierced his defenses, and he found himself wanting to be the man she saw when she looked at him. Arya, in turn, discovered her own depths. In Ethan's presence, she was bold, unafraid to voice her desires, to claim what she wanted. She felt her body as a source of power, not shame her curves, her skin, the way her breath hitched when he touched her. She learned to love the sound of her own laughter, the way it filled the silence, and the way Ethan's eyes crinkled when he joined her. She was no longer the girl who doubted her worth. She was a woman who knew she was enough, who dared to love a man the world might not understand. One night, as they lay tangled in his bed, the sheets cool against their heated skin, Ethan traced the curve of her spine with his fingertips, his touch reverent. The room was lit by a single candle, its flame dancing in the dark, casting shadows across his face. He was beautiful like this, his hair mussed, his chest bare, the lines of his body a study in strength and vulnerability. Arya rested her head on his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart, her own body still humming from their closeness. His hand paused, and he spoke, his voice soft, almost a whisper. "I thought I was done with this," he said, his words heavy with wonder. "With feeling like this. Then you walked in, and, God, Arya, you've changed everything." She lifted her head, meeting his gaze, and saw the truth therein, love that scared him, as much as it thrilled him. She leaned in, kissing him softly, her lips lingering on his. "You've changed me too," she said, her voice steady, sure. "I didn't know I could feel this. Alive." But the world outside their bubble was not so kind. Whispers began to circulate: classmates who saw Arya lingering at the shop, neighbors who noticed the way Ethan's eyes followed her. The age gap, 16 years, was a chasm to some, a scandal to others. Why him? They asked, their voices laced with judgment. She's so young, so bright. He's too old, too set in his ways. Arya heard the murmurs, felt the weight of their stares, but she didn't care. Ethan was her truth, her home, and no one else could understand the way his touch grounded her, the way his words lifted her. Ethan, though, felt the pressure more keenly. He was no stranger to judgment, but the thought of Arya facing Etoph, her bright future, dimmed by gossip gnawed at him. He hid it well, his smile as warm as ever, but Arya saw the tension in his jaw, the way his hands lingered on her, as if memorizing her. She knew he was wrestling with the same question the world asked. Was he right for her? Could he be the man she needed? Or was he a selfish fool, stealing her youth? One evening, as they sat in the shop, the rain tapping against the windows, Arya sensed the shift in him. He was quieter, his touches more tentative. She reached for his hand, her fingers lacing through his, and felt the strength there, the warmth. "What's wrong?" she asked, her voice soft but firm, her eyes searching his. He sighed, running a hand through his hair, the silver at his temples catching the light. "I see the way people look at us," he said, his voice low, pained. "I hear what they say, and I wonder, am I holding you back? You're meant for so much, Arya. I don't want to be the reason you lose that." Her heart clenched, a mix of love and frustration. She stood, moving to stand before him, her hands framing his face, forcing him to meet her gaze. His skin was warm under her palms, the stubble rough against her fingers, and she felt the strength of his jaw, the pulse at his throat. "You're not holding me back," she said, her voice fierce, her eyes blazing. "You're the one who makes me feel like I can do anything. Don't you get it? I'm not here because I'm lost. I'm here because I found you." Ethan's eyes softened, and he pulled her into his lap, his arms wrapping around her, his lips finding hers in a kiss that was both apology and promise. She felt the love in it, the fear, and she kissed him back, pouring everything into either certainty, her desire, her heart. In that moment, they were untouchable, their love a fire that no judgment could extinguish. But the world was persistent, and Arya knew the challenges were only beginning. She didn't care she was ready to fight for this, for him, for the woman she was becoming. And as she nestled against him, his heartbeat steady beneath her cheek, she felt a truth settle into her bones. Love wasn't logical, but it was real, and theirs was worth every risk. The Seattle winter had settled in, wrapping the city in a chill that seeped into bones and hearts alike. The rain, once a romantic backdrop to Arya Tran's stolen moments with Ethan Callahan, now felt like a relentless judge, hammering against the windows of Callahan's books as if to underscore the weight of the world's disapproval. For Arya, at 22, and Ethan, at 38, their love had been a secret fire, burning bright in the quiet corners of the bookstore and Ethan's apartment above it. But secrets, like fires, could not be contained forever, and the world was closing in, its judgments sharp and unyielding. Arya had never felt more alive than in Ethan's arms. His touch, those strong, careful hands that traced her curves with reverence, ignited her in ways she'd never imagined. At 5'5", her body was a study in grace and strength, her long legs toned from years of dance, her waist narrow, flaring to hips that swayed with a confidence she'd only recently claimed. Her skin, a warm ivory, glowed under the lamplight, and her dark hair, thick and lustrous, cascaded over her shoulders, framing a face that was both delicate and fierce. High cheekbones, full lips, and eyes that held a universe of emotion. She wore fitted sweaters and jeans that hugged her form, or dresses that clung to her like a second skin, each choice deliberate, knowing how Ethan's gaze would darken, his breath catch, when he saw her. She reveled in the power of her body, the way it drew him, the way it felt like a gift when his fingers brushed the curve of her neck or the small of her back. Ethan was her opposite and her match, a man whose presence filled a room without effort. At 6'2", his frame was lean but powerful, his shoulders broad, his chest taut beneath fitted Henleys or flannel shirts that hinted at the muscle beneath. His dark hair, streaked with silver at the temples, fell in soft waves, and his hazel eyes, flecked with gold, held a depth that made her feel seen, known. The faint stubble on his jaw rasped against her skin when he kissed her, and his hands long-fingered, strong, with veins that traced paths she longed to follow, moved with a precision that was both tender and commanding. His scent, cedar and old books with a hint of spice, was a drug, and his voice, low and gravelly, could unravel her with a single word. He was beautiful, not in a polished way, but in the lived-in, rugged way of a man who'd faced the world and emerged stronger, softer, wiser. Their nights together were a sanctuary. In the shop's back office, lit by a single lamp, or in Ethan's apartment, where jazz records spun and candlelight danced, they explored each other with a hunger that was both physical and soul-deep. Arya would straddle his lap, her thighs bracketing his, feeling the heat of his body through his jeans, the hard planes of his chest against her softness. His kisses were slow, deliberate, his lips tasting of whiskey and want, his tongue teasing hers until she moaned, her fingers tangling in his hair. His hands would roam, one splaying across her lower back, pressing her closer, the other tracing the curve of her breast, his thumb brushing the sensitive peak until she arched into him, breathless. She felt every inch of him, the strength in his arms, the subtle flex of his abdomen, the pulse at his throat where she pressed her lips, tasting salt and warmth. In those moments, she was fearless, her body a map he charted with care, her heart open, trusting his. But the world outside their haven was not so forgiving. The whispers that had begun as murmurs grew louder, sharper. Classmates at the University of Washington noticed Arya's frequent visits to the shop, her lingering smiles, the way she glowed when she spoke of a friend. Neighbors in Capitol Hill saw the way Ethan's eyes followed her, the way his hand brushed hers when he thought no one was watching. The 16-year age gap was a scandal to some, a puzzle to others. "She's so young," they'd say, their voices dripping with pity or disdain. "He's practically old enough to be her father." The words stung, but Arya brushed them off, her love for Ethan a shield. He was her home, her truth, and no one could understand the way his touch grounded her, the way his words, thoughtful, measured, made her feel like she could conquer anything. Ethan, though, carried the weight of those judgments like a stone. He'd lived long enough to know how the world worked, how it could tear down what it didn't understand. The thought of Arya facing scorn, of her bright future, her psychology degree, her dreams of helping others tarnished by gossip, ate at him. He hid it well, his smile warm, his touch steady, but Arya saw the signs, the tension in his jaw, the way his hands lingered on her, as if memorizing her, the quiet moments when his gaze turned inward, shadowed by doubt. He loved her God, he loved her, but he wondered if that love was selfish, if he was stealing her youth, her potential, by holding her close. The breaking point came on a cold December evening, when Arya's parents discovered the truth. They'd always been demanding, their expectations a constant pressure graduate with honors, secure a prestigious internship, marry a man who fit their vision of success. Arya had kept Ethan a secret, knowing they'd never approve, but a careless memento photo shared by a friend, Arya and Ethan laughing outside the shop, betrayed her. The call came late, her mother's voice icy, her father's a thunderclap of disapproval. "Who is this man?" they demanded. 38? A bookstore owner? "Arya, what are you thinking? You're throwing your life away." The words were knives, cutting deep, and Arya fought back tears, her voice shaking as she defended Ethan, defended their love. But her parents were unrelenting, threatening to cut her off, to pull her tuition, to do whatever it took to save her from this mistake. She fled to the shop, her heart a storm, her body trembling. Ethan was there, as always, his presence a beacon in the dark. He wore a navy sweater, the sleeves pushed up, his forearms strong, his eyes softening as he saw her. But when she told him about her parents, about their threats, his face changed, a flicker of pain crossing his features. He pulled her into his arms, his chest warm against her cheek, his heartbeat steady, but his embrace felt differentless, certain, more desperate. He stroked her hair, his fingers gentle, but his silence was heavy, and she knew what was coming before he spoke. "Arya," he said, his voice low, rough with emotion. "I don't want you to lose everything because of me." He pulled back, his hands framing her face, his thumbs brushing her cheeks. His eyes were dark, tormented, and she saw the love there, but also the fear. "You're meant for so much: your degree, your career, a life that's yours to shape. I can't be the reason you give that up. I won't." Her heart clenched, a mix of love and fury. She gripped his wrists, her nails digging into his skin, feeling the pulse beneath. "Don't do this," she said, her voice fierce, her eyes blazing. "Don't push me away because of them, because of what people think. I chose you, Ethan, not because you're older, not because I'm naive, but because you're the first person who makes me feel real, like I'm enough." He flinched, her words ablaze, and for a moment he wavered, his hands tightening on her face. She saw the war in him, the love that burned as brightly as hers, the fear that he was holding her back. He leaned in, kissing her, a desperate, searing kiss that tasted of salt and sorrow. His lips were firm, hungry, his tongue claiming hers with a need that made her ache, but there was a finality in it, a goodbye she refused to accept. Her hands roamed his body, clutching his shoulders, feeling the strength there, the warmth, as if she could anchor him to her, keep him from slipping away. But Ethan pulled back, his breath ragged, his eyes wet. "I love you," he said, his voice breaking. "That's why I have to let you go. Not because I don't want you, God. I'll always want you. But because I want you to have everything you deserve." Arya's tears fell, hot and unstoppable, and she shook her head, her voice a whisper. "You're what I deserve." But he stepped back, his hands falling to his sides, and the distance between them felt like a chasm. She wanted to fight, to scream, to pull him back into her arms, but she saw the resolve in his eyes, the sacrifice he was making, and it broke her. They parted that night, not because their love had faded, but because it was too strong, too precious, to risk destroying each other. Arya left the shop, the rain cold against her flushed skin, her heart a shattered thing. She walked through Capitol Hill, the neon lights blurring through her tears, and felt the weight of his absence, the ghost of his touch on her skin. Ethan had given her something irreplaceable, a sense of herself, a courage she'd carry forever, but the cost was a pain she didn't know how to bear. In the days that followed, Arya threw herself into her studies, her final semester a blur of exams and papers. She moved through the world like a shadow, her laughter dimmed, her body aching for Ethan's warmth. She avoided the shop, knowing the sight of it would undo her, but she couldn't escape the memories, his smile, his hands, the way he'd made her feel like she could fly. She loved him still, fiercely, and she knew he loved her too, but love, she was learning, wasn't always enough to conquer the world. Ethan, too, was a ghost of himself. The shop felt empty without Arya's laughter, her presence a void he couldn't fill. He worked late, lost himself in books and jazz, but nothing dulled the ache. He loved her enough to let her go, but the sacrifice was a wound that wouldn't heal. He wondered if she'd move on, find someone her age, someone the world would approve of, and the thought was a knife, even as he prayed for her happiness. Their parting was not an end, but a pause, a space carved by love and fear. Arya clung to the hope that one day the world's judgments would fade, that she and Ethan could find their way back to each other. She didn't know if that day would come, but she knew one thing. Ethan had changed her, had shown her the woman she could be, and that was a gift she'd carry always, even as her heart broke for the man she couldn't hold. Seattle's spring arrived tentatively, as if unsure of its welcome after the long gray winter. The cherry blossoms in Capitol Hill bloomed in defiant bursts of pink, their petals scattering like confetti on the sidewalks, a quiet reminder that beauty could persist even after the coldest seasons. For Arya Tran, now 22 and newly graduated from the University of Washington, the world felt both vast and hollow. Her psychology degree was in hand, a testament to her resilience, but her heart carried a wound that hadn't healed the absence of Ethan Callahan, the man who'd changed her life in ways she could never unlearn. The months since their parting had been a blur of survival. Aria had thrown herself into her final semester, her days filled with exams, papers, and the relentless pressure of her parents' expectations. She'd moved through the world like a ghost, her laughter dimmed, her body aching for Ethan's touch, the warmth of his hands, the strength of his arms, the way his lips had claimed hers with a hunger that made her feel alive. At 5'5", her body was still a canvas of grace and power, her long legs toned, her curves soft yet strong, her dark hair a cascade of silk that caught the light. She wore fitted blouses and skirts now, professional yet alluring, each outfit a quiet assertion of the woman she'd become. Her skin glowed, her eyes deep and expressive held a story of love and loss, and though she smiled for the world, there was a shadow in her gaze, a longing she couldn't shake. Ethan, too, had been a shadow of himself. Callahan's book stood as it always had, its amber-lit windows a beacon in the rain, but without Aria, it felt like a shell. At 38, Ethan was still a striking figure, 6'2", his lean frame powerful, his dark hair streaked with silver, his hazel eyes flecked with gold that seemed dimmer now, haunted by her absence. His flannel shirts and jeans clung to his body, hinting at the muscle beneath, the broad shoulders that had once held her close, the hands that had traced her skin with reverence. His Sensitor, old books, a hint of spice lingered in the shop, a cruel reminder of the nights they'd spent tangled in each other, jazz playing softly, their bodies a language of their own. He worked late, lost himself in the rhythm of shelving books, but nothing filled the void she'd left. He loved her still, fiercely, but he'd let her go for her sake, believing it was the right thing, even as it tore him apart. Aria had avoided the shop since that December night, knowing the sight of it would break her, but graduation had shifted something in Harris' sense of closure, or perhaps a need to face the past. On a quiet April afternoon, with the sun breaking through the clouds, she found herself walking toward Capitol Hill, her heart pounding, her breath shallow. She wore a simple white dress, the fabric flowing over her curves, the neckline low enough to reveal the smooth curve of her collarbone, the hem grazing her thighs. Her hair was loose, catching the breeze, and her skin felt alive, tingling with anticipation and fear. She didn't know what she hoped to find Ethan, perhaps, or just a piece of herself she'd left behind. The shop came into view, its weathered sign unchanged, the windows glowing with that familiar amber light. Aria's steps faltered, her heart a storm of memory. Ethan's smile, the way his eyes crinkled when he laughed, the heat of his body against hers. She stood outside, her fingers brushing the glass, and for a moment she could almost feel him, as if the shop held the ghost of their love. But the door was locked, the sign flipped to closed. Her breath caught, a pang of disappointment sharp in her chest. She pressed her palm against the door, willing it to open, willing him to be there, but the shop was silent, empty. She turned to leave, her eyes stinging, when she noticed the mailbox beside the door, its lid slightly ajar. A single envelope peeked out, her name scrawled in a familiar, elegant hand, Ethan's. Her heart stopped, her fingers trembling as she reached for it. The paper was worn, as if it had been handled, reconsidered, before being left for her. She tore it open, her eyes scanning the words, each one a knife and a balm. "Arya," it began, "I've gone, not to run from you, but to give you the space you need to build the life you're meant for. You're a force, a light, and I've never been prouder of anyone than I am of you. I thought I could stop loving you, but I was wrong. You're in every corner of this shop, every note of jazz, every page I turn. If you ever find yourself remembering that rainy afternoon, the tea we shared, come back. I'll be somewhere, waiting, ready to pour you another cup. Until then, be everything you are, because that's more than enough. Ethan." Arya's tears fell, hot and silent, blurring the ink. She clutched the letter to her chest, her body trembling with a mix of grief and hope. He was gonna know forever, maybe, but for now, giving her the freedom he thought she needed. But freedom without him felt like a cage, and she wondered if he knew that, if he felt the same ache that consumed her. She looked at the shop one last time, its windows dark now, and whispered his name, a prayer, a promise. She walked away, the letter in her hand, her heart a tangle of love and uncertainty. The cherry blossoms swirled around her, a fleeting beauty, and she felt the weight of his words, the possibility they held. Would she find him again? Would the world soften, allow their love to bloom without judgment? She didn't know, but she knew one thing. Ethan had changed her, had shown her a strength and passion she'd carry always. He was her first love, her deepest, and no matter where life took her, he'd be a part of her, a fire that never fully faded. Arya tucked the letter into her bag, her fingers brushing the paper like a talisman. She didn't know what the future held, whether she'd chase her dreams in Seattle or beyond, whether she'd one day return to that shop, to him. But as she walked through the blooming streets, her body alive with the memory of his touch, she felt a spark of curiosity, a hunger for what came next. Their story wasn't over, not really. It was a pause, a breath, a question left unanswered. And for those of you listening, wondering what happens next, will Arya and Ethan find their way back to each other? Will their love defy the odds, or will it remain a beautiful, bittersweet memory? The answers lie ahead, in the next chapter of their story. Stay tuned, come back to my channel, because Arya and Ethan's journey is far from over, and the next part will leave you breathless, longing for more.